Hey, hey, you are listening to Intercultured with Anya Dula, and I am Anya Dula. So, welcome back to episode 3. You've been hanging out with me for a minute. I appreciate it. I appreciate you for being here. So episode 3 is going to be the last of my introduction episodes. I wanted these first 3 episodes to be ones that will help you understand what shaped my understanding and have been my experiences as a patient, as a nurse in the medical field, and more importantly, I want those 3 episodes to help shape an understanding for you as to what brought me to become a doula and to do the work that I do as a doula. And so the first 2 episodes were my birth stories, which I absolutely love. Make sure you go back to check those out if you haven't listened. Today is a story that is not so bright, but is very important in terms of what we know to be going on in the medical industry right now. And so what that is the maternal health crisis that's happening here in the United States. So before I dive into that, because I got a little bit ahead of myself, we are going to jump into our first segment, which is always what's the goings on. So what's the goings on right now, as probably most of you who are tuned into this podcast already know, but we are in the midst of a maternal health crisis here in the United States. And so I'll just tell you this about myself and about what you can expect from this podcast going forward is that I like to think of myself as a person, although I am a nurse and although I am by education, a social scientist, and although I am now currently working as a doula, I don't talk in stats and figures and percentages and all of the things that most people who work in the medical industry like to define their work by. When I share stories here, I will share the human side of those stories. And so if you're looking for facts and figures and percentages and all of the things that come from medical industry, then you need to go check out the people who like to, give you all of those things. That's not happening here. I tell stories about humans who have experiences, humans and their experiences in the medical industry. So, having said that, we are in the midst of a maternal health crisis. And what that means for the United States is that of all the developing countries, the United States has one of the worst maternal mortality rates that there is. And so what the maternal mortality rate tells us is of all of the women who are giving birth, how many women are not making it out of that experience, whether it's during their pregnancy, whether it's during their birth, or even for the year following during her postpartum period. And so anytime a woman dies during that time, that is what increases the maternal mortality rate. And so what we know is, as a nation, all of us, so that's all women across the board who are living in the United States, who seek medical care for pregnancy and childbirth in the United States, we are not faring very well to be in the nation that touts itself as having the best medical system that there is. It's what we've always known, right? I started in this industry back in 1999 2000 is when I started nursing school. And so all this time, I believed exactly what most of you probably believe, in that we have an excellent healthcare system, and that it is, and that we're safe here, and that if you find yourself in the hospital, that you're going to be taken care of. Now, of course, over those years, I have learned the difference. I talked about it in episode 1, the difference between the care that I knew growing up in the military system versus civilian care on the outside. So anyhow, then if that's not bad enough, on top of just the fact that we're all in the midst of this maternal health crisis, Black women have even higher numbers. So we know that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during that maternal time. So from pregnancy all the way through her postpartum, she's 3 to 4 times more likely than her white counterparts with the same demographic. And so that right there is the key. With the same demographic, within the same demographic, meaning we are accounting for same education levels, we're accounting for same access to health care, we're accounting for same health, like her overall health and well-being. And even when those things match, that Black women are still 3 to 4 times more likely to die during the pregnancy and childbirth time than her white counterparts. And so in years past, what used to be believed, because those numbers have always been skewed, that Black women have had these higher rates than white women, these numbers have always been skewed. But what used to be believed and shared from medical industry and experts and all the people who quote you your facts and figures that we use to have these conversations, is that we were saying, well, it's Black women who don't have access to health care. It's Black women who are less educated, so they're not taking care of themselves. It's Black women who eat poorly, and so their health is bad. And so now we know that those differences, like that those factors are not even factors, because when they set up the controls to see, these women are the same in every other aspect but race. So what's the problem? And the problem comes down to racism. The problem comes down to stereotyping. The problem comes down to Black women are not listened to. Black women are not believed. When they are sharing their symptoms, they are often dismissed. And so we're going to talk about that today. That goes into the topic that we're going to talk about. So before I get into the main topic, what I would like to share is the story, very sad story. A woman from Milwaukee, her name is Tashana Ward. Her family lovingly referred to her as Sunshine. She's 25 years old when she passed away at a hospital. Well, she didn't pass away at the hospital. She passed away because she left the hospital seeking care because she'd been there for hours and hadn't been helped. And so in a couple of the articles that I read, Tashana was earlier, because I believe, so this story broke in January, but I believe she passed away in September. It was sometime late 2019 when she actually passed away. But earlier in the year, 2019, she was pregnant and she had a baby that did not make it. I don't recall if the baby was stillborn. I don't even know if that was said in the story. But I don't know if the baby was stillborn or if the baby, was born alive and then later passed away. But she had that happen. And so Tashana was in her postpartum period when she died. And when she went to the hospital because she was having shortness of breath and chest pains. So she went to the emergency room. She texted her mother at 4:30 p.m. and told her mother that she was headed to the ER because she had chest pain and shortness of breath. At 4:58, the hospital did perform an EKG and a chest x-ray on her. And what the coroner relayed after her death was that the chest x-ray and the EKG showed that her heart was enlarged. So just put a pin in that right there about those tests being run, because it's going to tie into the main story that we'll talk about today. So that was at 4:58. The EKG and chest x-ray was done. At 7:30 p.m., Shauna made a Facebook post about the problems with ERs taking too long and they really need to do something, that it was crazy that she had been waiting so long, and she'd already been waiting so long, and she was told by the staff at the ER that her wait would likely be 6 to 10 hours. And so at some point, Tashana was afraid, and she called her sister and asked her sister to come pick her up and take her to an urgent care center. And unfortunately and tragically, Tashana never even made it to the urgent care center. She died on her way. And so when we talk about these stories of maternal mortality, we read these stories in the news, we hear a story, we repost and we repost. But what I would like to do today is humanize those stories, humanize the occurrences, because it's more than a news blip. It's more than stats and, these facts and figures that hospitals throw out to you. And they just, it's a lot of times when these things happen, hospitals will tend to cover themselves, by throwing out some sort of figures that make it all make sense. Well, you can make anything make sense. When you put numbers to it, you can make anything make sense when you put numbers to it. But what does not make sense is that here was a woman who showed up to the emergency room with an issue that warrants, by triage, immediate care, and for reasons unknown, because the hospital has done their usual job of sending out their condolences and then hiding behind closed doors. She's gone, and her family is missing their piece of sunshine, and they're devastated. So that's the conversation that I want to have today. The last thing I want to add to that about, hospitals when these occurrences happen is that it often feels like and looks like and tends to, when the story is left, seems as though these hospitals don't really have true accountability to the communities that they serve. And so, like I said, it's like a hiding behind closed doors. They shut down. Their PR people put out, we're sorry for the tragic and we send condolences to the family stories. They start having these conversations behind closed doors. But the issue with that is that they are still the ones with all of the power. And so, as we know, in situations where there is a huge power divide between two parties, and especially when one of those power divides is a corporation, because you have to understand that hospitals are corporations. It's what they are. We no longer have, these goodwill hospitals that Catholic nuns started to take care of the poor and the needy and to make sure that people who were not